I am the Edison phonograph, created by the great wizard of the New World to delight those...
In 1877, 12 years after the Civil War, Thomas Alva Edison, then only 30, announced to the world that he had invented the phonograph.
I can transport you to the realms of music.
The phonograph was just such an amazing new product. People couldn't believe it.
Here's somebody who can record and reproduce the human voice. Of all the things you could imagine doing, that was the thing that people couldn't imagine doing. And I think that's why it made Edison so famous.
It was America's Gilded Age and Edison its golden boy. An era of massive wealth and brutal poverty. Cities burst to life with immigrants and opportunities for the ambitious. Industrialists, capitalism, and new technologies were the celebrities of the day.
It's hard from the vantage point of the 21st century to really understand what a giant Edison was, except I suppose that we're still talking about him.
The success of Edison's early inventions like the phonograph made him famous, but it was his next big invention, the light bulb, and the battle that ensued that would define him. On an early fall day in September 1878, Thomas Edison invited a New York City reporter to take the train to his laboratory in New Jersey to see the latest invention he was developing. The promise of an electric light bulb, a glowing source of illumination that didn't involve fire, was a dream that had fascinated and frustrated inventors for decades.
You have to just remember what light was in those days. For people in New York, they would have been used to gas lighting. But gas lighting had to be lit with a match, and you had to be very careful that when you turned it off, that you turned off the gas, because it was not unusual for people to find themselves asphyxiated by all the gas in their room because there was no flame going. And so to suddenly have light that was not a flame seemed astonishing to people.
Excited by his scoop, the reporter rushed back to file his story. But what he didn't know was that Edison's light bulb was an early experiment, a bulb that would last only an hour or two. Edison had not yet figured out how to make a light bulb that would last long enough to be really useful or affordable. But Edison had another agenda in talking with the reporter.
Edison knew how to play the press, right? He knew the media, he understood it.
He had this tremendous innate sense of marketing and PR, what in those days would have been called ballyhoo, that just demonstrated the importance of making your product known above everyone else's and also scaring off everyone else.
The story touched off a sensation. Stock in gaslighting companies dropped. People sensed that Edison had pulled off another miracle, and the world was about to change. Thomas Edison had learned at an early age both the importance of self-confidence and the advantage of hard work. He was born into an average Midwestern family. His father ran a grocery store. He had very little formal schooling, and at 13 joined the railroad as a newsboy.
Thomas Edison was really a self-taught polymath genius. When he worked on the railroad as a teenager, he got himself a library card at the Detroit Public Library, which cost him 2 days' worth of pay, and began reading his way through there. And he'd always, even as a kid, been extremely interested in how things work and creating things and inventing things.
It was his work on the railroad that also left Edison with one of his defining physical traits. One day, while running to get on the train, the conductor lifted him by his ears, and something popped. From then on, Edison's hearing began to decline.
And he saw this as an advantage because it filtered out all kinds of extraneous events going on in his life. Now, other people would have seen this as a great negative. And that was really classic Edison. Everything, he always saw things in a very optimistic, can-do way.
While working on the railroad, Edison learned how to operate the telegraph and soon started trying to improve the machinery, which led to one of his first important inventions. the quadruplex telegraph could transmit 4 messages at a time. Edison sold it for what was then an astronomical sum of $30,000. Not only would the success of his early inventions give Edison financial independence, they would later provide inspiration for his work on the light bulb.
Edison, from early in his career, was recognized by people in the telegraph industry, right, as a great inventor. And so there was already kind of a buzz about him in the New York area, and there were people who were beginning to take notice of him.
The young Edison capitalized on his early success and started up what he called an invention factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Here, he promised to have a new invention every 10 days, a major one every 6 months. One newspaperman crowned Edison the Wizard of Menlo Park.
And it sticks. You know, it just seems to capture something about this guy, that he was, you know, he was able to do things that other people weren't. He was a real wizard.
He was such an icon of what America was. This tremendous sense of possibility, this embracing of technology, and the combining of that technology with business.
One of the things that set Edison apart from his contemporaries was this vision of the business side, right? Most inventors in that period were happy to come up with some device that they felt was superior and to rely on others. Well, Edison, what set him apart was the fact that he wanted the technologies to be associated with one name, and that name was Edison.
In his quest to invent the light bulb, one of Edison's biggest supporters was none other than Wall Street tycoon J.P. Morgan. Edison's Wall Street backing was critical in his attempt to harness incandescent light.
People were completely skeptical. I mean, the true scientists and experts of the day all said, oh, there's no way he could do this. So he was a person who was always going against whatever received wisdom was.
Other inventors had tried to make a light from a glowing or incandescing wire. But the obstacle was that in order to get the wire hot enough to glow, it would become so hot that it would fail.
Well, Edison thinks, I'm just going to use a telegraph relay and switch the current on and off. So when it gets too hot, we'll have a way of tripping the switch, and it'll cool down, and then as it cools down, it'll trip it back on, and so we'll just keep it regulated that way, and we'll keep it right around the melting point, but not at the melting point.
As doggedly as he tried to make this idea work, he couldn't. Edison liked to say that invention is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. His genius had been to realize that a light bulb needed to be highly resistant to electric current, which would make the system more efficient and affordable. But getting to this goal required all kinds of twists and turns. To solve the problem of the melting filaments, he shifted his focus to the bulb. Edison picked up where others had tried and failed, and successfully created an effective vacuum. Without air, the filament did not burn or melt. With this success, the next challenge was finding just the right filament. He knew it must be highly resistant to electric current, yet made of a strong, thin fiber so it would last long enough and glow brightly.
And he just methodically worked his way through every kind of thing you can think of that could be a filament. And in his lab notebooks, you see all the things that they went through. I mean, they were always looking for all kinds of natural fibers, different kinds of animal hairs, and different kinds of cloth and wires, all kinds of different kinds of metal wires.
Edison, always famous for his one-liners, once said, "Sometimes all you need to invent something is a good imagination and a pile of junk." For months after Edison promised to be lighting up Manhattan, he and his team worked tirelessly.
Edison was a workaholic. I mean, if you worked with him, you could expect to put in very long and tiring hours. But you were doing it with him in this pursuit of this amazing goal. There's a wonderful picture of him just completely asleep in his clothes on top of a table. But that was one of the ways he dealt with when he kind of hit a wall about what to do about something, or he felt discouraged. He would just go to sleep.
Clearly, as an inventor, Edison stood out in remarkable ways. As a human being, he's a much more complicated person, as are we all. There were ways in which he was a charismatic figure, and so working with him in the laboratory, you clearly get the sense that this was a special thing to do. On the other hand, it wasn't that easy to be the son or daughter of a great inventor or the wife.
Edison had married Mary Stilwell, a young worker in one of his early factories, and together they had 3 children. Edison paid very little attention to his family because he much preferred spending his time in the lab. Edison once wrote, "My wife, dearly beloved, cannot invent worth a damn." But as the months went by in Edison's quest for the light bulb, it wasn't only his wife and children that were feeling neglected. He was being pressured by his investors, too.
If he ever despaired, he was not particularly vocal about that. That would not have been Edison. In Edison's world, everything was always possible, and he was the man who was going to do it. But definitely, there were long months when they were just searching for how to make this technology work.
Edison's persistence slowly began to pay off, but that's not the way Edison, always the showman, liked to tell it.
The story he liked to tell was he was at his wit's end. It was very hot. He's fanning himself with this bamboo fan, and he looks at the bamboo and he thinks, bamboo.
Edison discovered that a bamboo fiber imported from Madaki, Japan, that was then carbonized so that it wouldn't burn, made for the longest-lasting bulb filament.
There's never this aha moment, but there is a moment at which you can show the invention to people, and you can show it successfully. And what Edison did was, he decided he was going to have this series of demonstrations at his laboratory over New Year's 1879, 1880. And he brings in one of his friends who's a reporter, and he says, "I'm going to give you a scoop, but don't publish this until we're ready for the demonstrations." Well, he's a reporter, he can't resist, and on December 21, instead of December 31, he announces to the world that Edison has solved the problem. And there's this huge story in the paper.
There was such a clamor to see this amazing new technology, the railroads had to schedule extra train lines out to Menlo Park.
When you read about what this demonstration was, you almost want to laugh because it was, fewer light bulbs than we would have in our houses, an ordinary American house today. And people were coming from miles to see this. And they're just amazed because they turn a switch and a light comes on. And it's not a flame, and you turn the switch and the light goes off.
It must have looked like a fairyland, right? This utterly remarkable vision of these glowing lamps, steady lights. Here was this wonderful new invention, and people realized that they were seeing the dawn of a new age, I think.
Edison was never one to rest on his laurels or much other than his cot in the laboratory. So even before the New Year's demonstration was over, Edison was reorganizing his invention factory to take on the monumental task of lighting up southern Manhattan. His team now had to not only invent, but develop an entire system to power these new light bulbs.
Everything had to be designed from scratch. From the bulb, to the generator, to the meters, to the sockets, to the fixtures, the underground wires, the voltage regulation, the safety fuse. It all had to be designed as a system so it worked together. And it's a remarkable undertaking. And then to go into New York, right, and design this whole central system that would light, a square mile of New York.
Edison's crucial discovery of a high-resistance filament meant he would need far less of the costly copper wiring, thereby making the expense of his electrical system competitive with gas lighting. The generating station for the new system would be on Pearl Street, and the wires would reach out to light the homes, factories, and offices in an area of roughly a square mile. It wasn't a coincidence that the area also included the offices of his largest financier on Wall Street and the nearby offices of the city's largest papers. Some electrical wires had already come to the cities to run telephones, telegraphs, and fiery arc lights. These wires were increasingly clogging the sky overhead and had begun to be seen as a public nuisance. Edison's solution was to bury all of his electrical cables. But of course, that had never been done before.
They had tremendous troubles with this. They would bury the wires would short out, and they would dig them all back up.
One newspaper reported on a horse that got a shock from an improperly grounded wire. Edison's investors also balked at how much longer the process was taking than his initial optimistic estimate.
Edison begins to be, let us say, less and less of a golden boy, because he's not delivering at the rate that he said he would. He had said that he would be lighting up Manhattan pretty much in a matter of months. And this turned out to be just much more difficult than he realized.
Finally, in 1882, 2 years after he started building the Pearl Street system, the big day arrived and Edison was ready to light up Manhattan.
So on September 4th, he walks into the central station and he synchronizes his watch with the engineer. And at 3 o'clock, they're going to start the system and Edison's going to flip the switch in J.P. Morgan's office.
They've installed a lot of light bulbs, about 200 bulbs all told through the building. And at 3 o'clock, he is going to turn the switch on there. And just as he's about to do it, one of his aides says, $100 bet it doesn't work. And Edison says, taken. And he turns the switch on, and the lights come on.
And this glowing light comes on. And not just in Morgan's office, but throughout this district. And as the sun is setting, right, and it's getting darker, you know, people are out in the streets just looking in wonder at these lights all over this district.
It was a gigantic leap forward. Once it succeeded, once again, he had proven that there was no one like Thomas Edison.
A newspaper editorial of that era proclaimed that the inventors of the day were to American history what the Founding Fathers had been the century before, and that the Patent Office had replaced the halls of Congress as the symbol of American triumphs.
That's what made him so crucial as a figure to identify with this new world that was being created, right? And technology remains important to us. That's why Edison still resonates.
Edison basically envisions himself, and he has no reason not to believe this, that he is going to electrify the world, that he will be the person who will create an empire of light. And he wants this because he wants to make large amounts of money so he can invent whatever he wants. And also because he's fascinated by electricity and all its possibilities.
Until 1886, Edison did have the field pretty much to himself. Orders for electrical generating stations were coming in from cities around the world, but not fast enough. Edison, the businessman, oversaw an ambitious effort to promote electrical power. One stunt involved recruiting 400 men to march through the streets of Lower Manhattan with Edison light bulbs attached to their heads. Wires ran down their sleeves to a generator at the rear, pulled by horses. But the major drawback to Edison's system was that his direct current, or DC as it was known, could only travel about a half mile.
Start thinking about this, because it means that there would be a fairly noisy, filled with coal, because there would be huge piles of coal to run the steam engines, and then of all the smoke from the coal out of the chimneys, every mile or two in cities.
This weakness was soon exploited by a man named George Westinghouse, who was selling a new form of electricity called alternating current. Alternating current, or AC, had one distinct advantage. You could transport it great distances along high-voltage wires. At first, Edison held off the challenge from AC because only his DC system could power a motor, which was crucial to any factory or streetcar. But then a brilliant Serbian engineer named Nikola Tesla invented an alternating current motor. Ironically, it was an idea he had unsuccessfully tried to interest Edison in years earlier.
Edison had invented every aspect of his electrical system, from the light bulb to the generators, to the transmission lines, to the wall switches, everything he had had a hand in. And he had huge pride in the fact that his name was on all these patents. And so when Tesla came to him and said, I have a better idea about how you can have an electrical empire, and it would be based on alternating current, Edison was not interested. He said no.
A few years later, however, Westinghouse said yes to Tesla. With the help of the new AC motor, sales of Westinghouse power stations grew. It soon became clear that AC current was the better technology. Edison continued to insist that higher voltage AC power was too dangerous, and despite pleas from managers in his own company, Edison refused to embrace AC current. The pressure in the battle of the currents remained intense because vast fortunes were at stake. Both sides fought desperately to sell new power stations. However, Edison's early hold on the market was slipping away to Westinghouse.
George Westinghouse is absolutely beating the pants off of Edison because he is now offering a superior system of electrical delivery. And so Edison clearly decides he's going to go after Westinghouse and try his best to destroy AC in the public mind as something that was so dangerous you would not want it in your house. And the way he decides to do this is by endorsing the use of alternating current in the electric chair.
Edison, a lifelong opponent of the death penalty, gave his support and advised that the electric chair be run off AC current. On August 6, 1890, William Kemmler, who had axed his wife to death, was the first man to be taken to the electric chair. Or, as the Edison people promoted it, he was to be Westinghoused.
Reporters came from all over the world and set up a special telegraph station across from the prison. And it went very badly. They did not give him enough electricity. They thought they were finished. They turned the current off. And then Kemmler began to convulse. And it was just horrifying. I mean, people were fainting, and they began yelling, and they had to turn the power back on. And then they let it on for so long that he was roasted.
This desperate move did not change the public's opinion of alternating current and did little to help the fate of Edison's electrical company, which continued to lose out to the Westinghouse AC system. In February 1892, Edison's board of directors, led by J.P. Morgan, decided to merge Edison General Electric and a smaller alternating current company. The new company was named General Electric. At age 45, Thomas Edison was forced out of the company he had created 14 years earlier at his Menlo Park laboratory. He said publicly that he was eager to move back to inventing full-time, but one of the few times that his characteristic optimism failed him, he complained to his secretary, "I've come to the conclusion that I never did know anything about electricity."
Well, I think it was hard on his ego in some respects, but you know what? When people thought about electric light and power, they didn't think about any other inventors, did they? It still was Edison.
After the creation of General Electric, Edison did largely leave the electrical field, and his most productive days were behind him. But the accomplishments that still lay ahead were by any measure spectacular. There are historical films that capture Edison as a nearly deaf old man visiting a General Electric light bulb factory. Those films exist, of course, because after the War of the Currents, Edison played a pioneering role in the development of motion pictures. Along with the movies, Edison went on to help develop the record industry, and he invented new technologies for mining iron ore. He got into the cement business, which helped build Yankee Stadium and some of the first prefabricated houses. He engineered a long-life storage battery and experimented on the creation of natural rubber. To this day, Edison has more patents than any other American, 1,093.
Edison never disappeared. Edison never disappeared. He was always just a very important person and inventor. He invented things that we can all relate to and that we love. He still is an icon. I mean, we are still every day turning on those light bulbs.
We inherited something from the 19th century, which is this belief in the future of progress, especially of technological progress. And that's clearly what was going on with Edison, the people who worked in his laboratory. They realized they were working on creating a new future.
On his death in 1931 at the age of 84, the New York Times praised the man whose genius so magically transformed the everyday world. No one, it went on to say, in the long roll of those who have benefited humanity, has done more to make existence easy and comfortable.